Hello, Year 13s. So, since we last spoke, and I think I've put this on, no, I haven't. This is our first lesson this week. So since we last spoke and over the weekend, several things have come to light. First and foremost, at 9:30 on Saturday morning, I discovered that we were still planning as a school to do mock examinations in February, meaning that the third week back, I think, after the February half term is still scheduled to be mock examinations. Furthermore, there was a leaked document from the government, I haven't seen anything more about this, suggesting that there'll be mini exams, whatever they mean. And as a consequence, I'm a little uncomfortable about not revising, I guess, before February. Now, my gut instinct says that this is unlikely, but by the same token, if it does happen, I don't want you to be unprepared, especially given that we don't know exactly what evidence the government is going to require, and I rather suspect they'll require something. So with my mop of hair and a white void, I'm going to introduce revision, remind you what's gone on, and we'll discuss this more. I mean, we're still doing a practice question on Thursday. That hasn't changed. I'll still try and find time to do nationalism and anarchism. Of course I will. I think they're fascinating and I think we've got the time, so why not? But I'll do those after February because by that point we'll have revised, we'll know everything. We may as well add an extra other ideology. More about that in a moment. But I wanted you to get into the idea of revisiting what we've done previously and making sense of the previous notes that we've made. So without further ado, and you must excuse me, I haven't got my high definition camera and microphone, so the sound quality and picture quality is significantly worse than usual, though I suppose it doesn't really matter because it's my face that you're looking at, and that is hardly a high quality actionable item. Nevertheless, here is my attempt at doing things, revising politics. You'll notice that my banner images have changed and are more or less up to date. I've still got Mr. Johnson celebrating his 2019 victory. I've got Keir Starmer in there. I've got Chris Whitty because everyone seems to love him. I've got Parliament. I've got what happened last week. And I've got Joe Biden and Kamala Harris celebrating their victory with masks on. So what is the plan behind this? It's a guide, basically. It's no more than that. It's what I'd do in a lesson, except I'd probably write it on the board rather than doing it with a PowerPoint. But as I've discovered, trying to do things on a board can prove difficult, especially as I'm not in school at the moment. Nevertheless, that won't work. That will. Now, I'm hoping the animations work. I haven't had time to check them, so I apologize in advance. A reminder about how the examinations are going to proceed. Now, paper 3, we've gone through quite a bit. You've got 2 comparison questions worth 12 marks each. And then you've got 2 essays that you have to write at the end worth 30 marks. So 2 12 markers, 2 30 markers, making 84 marks in total. Every paper has 84 marks. You are pretty good now at the 12 marker comparison questions. And we will do another one of those. I'm reasonably confident about your ability to do that now, using theories and using ideas. You can also write a pretty mean essay. Again, I'm reasonably confident. We will come on to more of those practices. Do not worry. But one thing we haven't done, because we haven't really had time, is talk about the format of papers 1 and 2. Paper 1 is on UK politics and paper 2 is on UK government. You'll recall that the last time you saw anything like this was at the beginning of AS. And at that point, we were still talking about AS examinations. And as a consequence, the topics haven't changed. I'll go through those first. So UK politics, which are the topics? It's democracy and participation. We talked about franchise, debates on suffrage, i.e. who has the vote and who should get the vote. We talked about pressure groups and went into way too much detail on pressure groups. So you know everything there is to know about pressure groups. And you really honestly do. You know hordes. If there's a question on pressure groups, you should absolutely clean up because you have so much information and so many examples to throw at the page. We talked about rights and obligations, one of my favorite lessons. And hopefully you remember about that, where we're talking about the Terrorism Act and we're talking about how things affect what is being done. I'm getting shot in the face by a reflection, but it's not really affecting the video, so let's not worry about it. We then did political parties. We talked about what their roles and functions were. You may remember that was a pink background thing with a cute bear, and I did all those eyesore rip-off and political parties are cute, etc., etc., etc. Now that's going to get irritating. Bear with me whilst I just pause this and see if I can stop that shining in my eye. I did it with a box. Seems to have done the trick. So hopefully we're all good now. Anyway, we talked about that. You did all the mnemonics. I saw was about their functions. Ripoff was what they did. Cute was how they worked and what they looked like. I can't remember the other ones off the top of my head. We'll go over them again. We also looked at the history of the Tories, Labour Party and Lib Dems. We looked at way back, and we drew it all the way through to the modern era. And we talked about how that was changing. Now, we did it when Corbyn was still in charge. Keir Starmer, I updated this year, so do check your notes again. We talked about emerging parties like the Greens, for example. And at the time, we talked about UKIP and Brexit Party, both of which have now gone. It's now the Reform Party, made a big hoo-ha back in August, I think, and now has disappeared again because we're in lockdown again. And we talked about the context in which they operate. We talked about what's happening in the world, and I've tried to keep you up to date with that lesson by lesson, week by week, just sharing stuff on YouTube. Yes, I know at that very point someone's ticking off the bingo chart. I don't have any YouTube videos. I shared them yesterday already, so hopefully you've had a chance to look at those. We also talked about electoral systems, my personal favourite. We talked about the different systems in the UK. We talked about first past the post. We talked about STV. We talked about additional vote. We talked about supplementary vote. We talked about additional member system. And they are all of them fun and used in different ways. We briefly touched on PR as used in the EU elections, but now that's no longer relevant because we have officially left the EU and will no longer take part in EU elections. So we don't need to know about that system anymore. We talked about referenda, the plural of referendum, and we talked about the roles that they play. And again, I had some bar charts about turnout and the effects that they had, and that was fun because who doesn't love a bar chart? And we talked about voting behaviour in the media. Now, we went through 3 elections and we lived through 2019. I haven't updated you with many of the stats about the 2019 election, so I would expect you in an exam to use the 2017 election, as that was the stats that we had available. We lived through the 2019 election, but I never updated you with the stats. If you have updated the stats about who voted where and which groups voted for what, then please feel free to use it. I'm not complaining. You have to do 1997. And 1992 was the other one because it was in the textbook. It made sense to do that. I think I gave you stats on 1979 as well. So you pick. You've got to do at least 3. You've got to include 1997. One of them's got to be after 1997 and one of them's got to be before 1997. The ones in the textbook, which are the easiest to research and remember, are 92, 97 and 2017. But you have information on 2019 as well if you wish. And I've also given you information on 1979. I think I've also given you information on the coalition election 2010, but I can't remember whether we went through that in detail. We also talked about the media's influence on those, and you lived it in 2019. And we talked about new media and the role of the internet and how that was playing a bigger role. And it still is, especially in lockdown. It's during the coronavirus crisis, social media has exploded in influence on our political system. Everything from Chris Whitty being a bit of a popular figure at the moment to what occurred at Barnard Castle, to, well, the memes, the fresh memes, and they continue to come. The memes continue to be created. And let's not even start with the stuff in the US as well. We'll come on to that later. The last thing, there it is. The last thing I'm going to talk about is ideologies. One thing we didn't talk about at the beginning of last year because it was supposed to be for the A level. Here it is now. The 5th section you need to know about is the core concepts or the core ideologies, and they are conservatism, liberalism and socialism, and they are the big daddies. Now, this particular part of the course was done entirely online, and I believe it's all still available on YouTube where you found this video. I'm going to try and put it into a nice neat set of like a, what do they call them, playlist, so you can find it more effectively. But the big daddies are all absolutely there waiting for you. So the big daddies, the big 3, they're the ones that appear in paper 1. Paper 2, I forgot that faded away. Paper 2, we started with the Constitution. We talk about its nature and its sources. We talk about changes since New Labour came in and the reforms that they brought into the House of Lords. So, for example, in 1999, they get rid of hereditary lords, or rather, they don't. They get them to elect 96 of their number from 137 of them, or possibly more, so they could continue to attend, but they no longer play as big a role. We talked about devolved bodies. We talked about things like the mayoral elections. We talked about the Scottish Parliament, the Welsh Parliament, the Northern Ireland Assembly. And these are important considerations, their roles in society, and also reforms such as bringing in police commissioners and bringing in mayoral elections in many places that hadn't asked for them and had rejected them in a referendum because of David Cameron's big society. That seems to have stalled because King of the North, King of the North, King of the North has rather given the lie to the problem of giving people a bit more localized power. And you might remember that controversy from earlier in the year, where we, I think, discussed the role of Andy Burnham and the tiers of lockdown. How can you imagine tears before the Christmas holidays? We talked about Parliament, how it's structured, what its role was, why I've got Lord singing royals stuck in my head. We talked about the comparative powers of the House of Commons and the House of Lords. Now, by the way, this is where the year 12s are up to. So if you go digging on the YouTube channel, you will find the videos I have created or I'm creating on this very topic, because it's exactly where I'm up to with year 12. There is nothing to stop you going and watching those videos as they go live and using them for your revision. Why ever not? I've been forced to create a PowerPoint for it. It may augment your notes. It may be more useful than going through the textbook. There was a legislative process. How is it that laws are made? What's the role in which they go through? And we've done this a little bit because we've compared it to what happens. You remember that song about that I'm just a bill, going to Capitol Hill, along with a bunch of domestic terrorists, I suppose, or at least highly prepared middle-class people who then complain that they can't fly home. So we know a little bit about the legislative process, but remind yourselves, refresh your memory. Those lines at the top of the banner image are really going to get to me. I'm sure they're not getting you. We talked about prime ministers and the executive, their function and their powers. We talked about the concept of ministerial responsibility, which seems to have died a death this last year, certainly since March. And it's fascinating watching how that's gone on. I mean, well, Gavin Williamson, just as a person, Priti Patel, as a person, Matt Hancock, as a person. And don't even get me started on Rishi Sunak and his opposition to a lockdown and the fact that he's been quiet for 6 weeks. Ministerial responsibility seems to have taken a bit of a nosedive, but then SPADs are supposed to have responsibility too. And they didn't. SPADs, Special Political Advisors. I am, of course, referring to Dominic Goings. Then we looked at the relationship between branches. It was a long time ago. Check your notes again. We looked at how the Supreme Court had helped sovereignty. We talked about the prorogation of Parliament and how they'd overturned that. We talked about how they'd done with the Gina Miller case, where they said that Parliament had to have the final say in a withdrawal bill. And that was a big, big deal. Now that we have a government with a majority, the Supreme Court is having less of and a pretty large majority at that, the Supreme Court is having much less of a role. And that in itself is fascinating and interesting and may be of use to you when you're discussing these things. Sorry, excuse me, it's just gone buzz. When you're discussing these things and writing essays about it. So we've got some really good modern examples for that. The textbook also talked about the changing relationship with the EU, which now we're officially out, we're seeing what that actually means. So any essay you're asked to write in the exam cannot really ask you for much detail. Rather, that is in a state of constant flux. As long as you're aware of the state of constant flux, and as long as you know roughly what's in that withdrawal agreement, and things are still coming to light, so don't worry about being specific. And there's a change there, and why it has changed. That's the most important thing. So don't worry too much about the ins and outs of the withdrawal bill or the agreement that's in place in the meantime. Don't worry too much about the specifics. Rather worry about how they came about and look at the processes that have been involved. Again, I can't imagine there's going to be too much specifically on the EU. Rather, it's going to use that as a lens through which to view how government works and how the different branches of government, the executive, the legislature, the judiciary, interact with one another. And largely, I think it's less of an issue to use in an essay than we perhaps thought at the beginning of the process. The last thing, if I can make it work, is the other ideology, singular. And the other ideology for now is feminism. And again, you will find videos on that on the YouTube channel. I didn't do many. There was also an assessment that in the end, I think only 2 people actually did. So if ever you want to have a go at that, and I will direct you towards it to do it. So if you've done it already, great, practice it again. We will come back to that later as part of our revision process. Not today, because I said on Thursday, we'll be talking about a question involving SCOTUS, and I intend to stick to that. So we will come back to it though. Be ready for that. So those are the areas that we're looking at. The assessment should have come up with those on the other side. Oh, I've got the assessment in the wrong place. Not that it matters. The assessment for paper 1, I've broken my animations, is as follows. The basics are it's 2 hours long, not an hour and 45 minutes. Secondly, it's worth 33%, well, 33 and a third, who's counting. The point is each paper is equally weighted. All papers are worth 84 marks. They just are. Why 84 in 120 minutes? It's just the way they do it. There are 3 sections to the paper. I can't remember that they call it this in the actual paper. It doesn't really matter. The section A is worth 30 marks, and there's a choice of 2 source-based questions. This is for paper 1, even though it confusingly comes under paper 2, and I apologize, though as you'll see, there's not a lot of difference. It's source-based, it's comprehension and analysis. You know how to use sources in politics. It's basically picking out the content, picking out who wrote it, quoting where necessary, and using the arguments they use to form the basis of your answer. Other than that, it's a pretty standard essay. It's just giving you the information that the examiner wants you to use. On the one hand, that's easier because they give you something to jog your memory. On the other hand, that's harder because you've got to focus on the specific points they want you to focus on. And personally, I find that quite confining. You might find that more useful because it tells you exactly what they're looking for and there's less freedom, which, let's face it, can be terrifying in an exam situation, and I don't blame you. So the idea is you understand it, then you analyze the arguments within it. You don't have to look at the origin of the source. You don't have to evaluate the source. You don't have to go into any great depth about why they're saying what they're saying, unless it helps answer the question, that last part. It's easier than all of the source questions you'll have come across, including those. Well, actually, it's similar to those in sociology. If you do sociology, it's very, very similar, except there's more information you can data mine. It's as simple as that. Section B is the 30-mark essay question, and by this point you're really used to these. These are the ones you enjoyed the most, if that is the right word, last year. It's analysis and evaluation. The only extra bit you need to be aware of is it may require links across sections. So I numbered things 1 to 4 previously. You may be asked to use information from democracy and participation when talking about, I don't know, the role of political parties or the role of the media. You may be expected to make those kinds of links. But frankly, we do that all the time in lessons anyway. And in discussion, in class discussion, I'm not worried about that. You guys think that way naturally. I don't need to force you to do it. So don't worry about it. If there is a connection, basically make it. You now have that freedom. Whereas before it didn't get you any credit and didn't lose you any marks. Now it's going to get you credit. You will be recognized for doing that and being a good political scientist, basically. So that's nice. Section C is the section on the big daddies, and it's just an essay, but it's a shorter essay. Don't worry, we'll go over these again. It's been a while since we've touched on them. They're not as in-depth as your 30-mark essays, but they're like short versions of the same thing. They're sort of 3 or 4 paragraphs long. You don't require too much in the way of an introduction. There's a bit of a conclusion, but each paragraph is supposed to be double-sided and it focuses on a different aspect of the question. So again, you're used to this kind of thing. We'll talk about that more in a later lesson. I'll give you more detail on that. We'll do some practices. Please don't worry about it. We can even talk about it on Thursday. So that's paper 1. Confusingly, paper 2 comes over the other side. I thought they came back up. I've utterly ruined my own thing here. I'm so sorry. But as you can see, I could have flipped them around because it's the same. The only difference is that for paper 2, rather than doing the big daddies and having a choice there of different questions that you can answer all of them, there'll be a choice between feminism, anarchism, and nationalism. And at present, you can only answer one of those questions. So when I say there's a choice, it's a bit of a misnomer. There isn't really a choice. You can only answer the stuff on feminism so far. We have the time, we have the technology. So I will probably add either anarchism or nationalism before the exams would roll around anyway. I see no reason why we can't, just not now, because I worry about the time we have remaining to us. They're the basics of the examinations. You'll remember the basics for the US politics, 12, 12, 230s, so 2 essays. And that's also 2 hours in length. And much the same thing applies in terms of timing. An essay takes 45 minutes, a 24-mark question takes half an hour, a 12-mark question is therefore 15 minutes long. And a 15-minute long answer is a short 3-paragraph answer that you may remember if you did history at GCSE. It was the old explain question way back when. So it's just 3 explained paragraphs. If you didn't take history, it's even simpler. You've got nothing colouring your view, and it is just 3 paragraphs on a 12-mark answer. So a 24-mark answer is 3 paragraphs again, but slightly more in depth. You're expected to do more with it than a 12-marker, which is half the time. So keep that in mind. And the 2 half-time ones, 12, 12, then 2 30s in the US, encourages you to go through those first 2 questions relatively quickly, and so you should. So please don't be threatened by that. It's easier than it looks. And we will come back to that again with practice. On Thursday, we'll talk in more depth about which questions you want to do. Obviously, we've got to do one on SCOTUS. We have to. That's just the way we do things. I'll do a 12-marker and a 30-marker as standard, just so you get in practice on both types of question. I won't ask you to do it in time conditions just yet, but if you do, it will be an hour. That's why I chose it. And yeah, this hopefully has refreshed your memory about what the different parts of the course were, and hopefully will encourage you to go and grab your notes, dig them out, have a look what's there, and remind yourselves of any questions you may have. If you've got any extra time, and let's face it, we're in lockdown, and you want to, and who wouldn't, you can go and check the stuff I'm creating for Year 12s. I think I've made it public on the YouTube channel. If I haven't, I apologize. Let me know in the comments and I'll sort it out for later. And have a review of what they're doing right now, because I'm forced to make PowerPoints. So the PowerPoints exist now, and I'll continue to do so. Other than that, that is my lesson for today. Thank you very much, if you have been, for watching. Do use any extra time from this video to go and get your notes, to read through them, and find any areas that you feel weak on and any areas you'd like me to focus on in our revision, because I'll have to revise. And I'll sort that out as soon as I can. My proposal for tomorrow, do we have 2 lessons tomorrow? My proposal for tomorrow with a single lesson will be to go over the early stage of, well, to go over the general points of paper 1 and just put everything in place and refresh your memories on mnemonics, and just give an overview of exactly what is required for each part of the units, just a bit more depth basically. And then I'll do something similar for Friday on paper 2, so you've got a nice easy roadmap with a bit more depth. I've given you the roadmap generally, but if I give you a bit more depth of what's expected, and that gives us all time to think of questions and areas you want me to cover in more detail. Thank you very much. Have a lovely rest of day, and I shall see you in the next video. Cue random YouTube music.